Hello, everyone. We are delighted to welcome you today to this session with Dr. James Pnyx for the recent publishing of his book. As you all know, James Pnyx is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. He is the former founding judge of the World Trade Organization's appellate body and chairman. James Pnyx has judged more trade disputes than anyone in the world. He's a fervent advocate for international cooperation, international law, sustainable development, and international trade. His career also includes having been a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, as well as a U.S. trade negotiator. He is the author of several books, including his most recent book, Democracy for a Sustainable World, The Past from the Next. James Pnyx has kindly agreed to sign copies of the book after this event. You can consult it and purchase it both at the WTO library as well as the WTO bookstore, which is located right next to the cafe. Thank you so much, Dr. Pnyx, for being here with us today. My name is Didier Vissereau. I'm a research fellow and teaching fellow at Harvard University, and I'm very excited to be with you all today to discuss this new book, Democracy for a Sustainable World. If I may summarize, the main thesis basically lies in this idea that we, as a society, have an opportunity to reshape democracy as it is today, and that democracy goes hand in hand with sustainable development, and that one cannot be achieved without the other. And to kick things off, before digging deeper in your main thesis, in your arguments, I wanted to ask you a simple question. You've worn so many hats in your life, done so many things. You've published a lot on your expertise on trade. What led you today, in 2025, to publish a book about democracy?
Thank you, Lily, and thank you all for sharing your time with us today. Let me first say I'm very pleased to be back once again in the WTO. I first came here as a young trade negotiator 45 years ago. I'm a bit older now, although I'm still fairly young for an international jurist. And I want to thank the WTO for once again featuring one of my books at the public forum. This is the third of my books that's been featured, and I'm deeply grateful. To answer your question, Lily, this is, as you note, the first book that I've written, of the 6 altogether that I've written and published, that is not primarily about trade and the global economy. I wrote this book about democracy because I believe democracy is the answer we're all searching for. And by that I mean true democracy, a lot more democracy. I've been practicing democracy since I was a teenager. I've been privileged to serve in either a legislative, administrative, or here at the WTO, a juridical capacity at every level of governance globally. And I've concluded that what's missing in the world is democracy. And I wanted to share my views about how we must transform democracy in order to create human flourishing in a sustainable society on a very prosperous an enduring planet. That's what my book is about.
Very interesting. And on this idea of how democracy and sustainable development go hand in hand, you mentioned how the effective participation of everyone is necessary to ensure the achievement of sustainable development goals, including the ones pursued by international organizations. Yet, when one looks at democracy, it is often short-sighted, focused on, and you criticize it, the current shape of democracy focuses on the interests of the majority. And the Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved need redistribution across geographies, redistribution across time and generations, as well as redistribution across people within a same national state. And so how do you see a new form of democracy going over and solving this issue of redistribution in democracies?
That's an excellent question. First of all, let me explain what I see as the connection between democracy and sustainable development. I see the two as inextricably interrelated. I don't believe we can have one without the other. We cannot have democracy without sustainable development. We cannot have sustainable development without democracy. Why is that? I believe that the human understanding, the human development that comes from achieving the social, economic, and environmental goals of sustainable development is what alone can provide us with the capacity to engage in genuine democracy, which I see as true self-rule. At the same time, I believe that it is the practice of a genuine, true, participatory democracy that alone can enable us to find the will and the way to achieve sustainable development. We can't have one without the other. Your question is perhaps the best that could be asked. How do we take the short-termism of what passes for democracy today and transform it into what Alexis de Tocqueville, a Frenchman, called the principle of interest rightly understood, that being a principle, an approach to thinking that does not just look at what's near, but also what's far away, and not just at now, but also in the future, a broader and longer term view. I believe that can only be done if we reform democracy by making it much more participatory. And in my book, I set out specific ways in which I believe we can take the half democracies that we have at best in the world today and make them into true participatory living democracies in which people can, for the first time since those who were privileged to be citizens in ancient Athens, engage in real democracy.
And we are going to come back to those specific policy tools and policy proposal that you put forward. You talk indeed a lot about this effective full participation and criticize the current state of democracies where if we have a goal of representative democracy where citizens would vote for leaders according to values and objectives and goals that then should be represented on a daily basis by those leaders. We see, in fact, that what actually happens is citizens' only engagement is to vote every few years when they do, and that the leaders then sometimes do not respect the will and intent of the citizens. So this is one kind of the end of the spectrum of democratic participation. The other end would be if you extrapolate participation on everything. So one could think, for instance, every citizen's voting on every building permit. And this is this issue that you address when you talk about ladder of participation. And I would love to hear more about how you envision the structure of this participative democracy working, especially around these ladders of participation.
Thank you, Lily. I think we will get the best results from democracy, the best and most effective outcomes, if we have the best of individual wisdom from the right representation and the best of collective wisdom from the random selection sortition. Pardon me a moment, I'm losing my voice. As my friends know, this doesn't usually happen to me, losing my voice. Again, I think we need the best of individual wisdom from right representation, not the kind we have now, and the best of collective wisdom from the random selection of sortition. And I would transform democracy and governance at every level in the world in order to achieve that, starting at the local level and going all the way up to include the global level, including institutions such as the World Trade Organization. It is only in this way that I think that we can bring people together to deliberate and make decisions that will be the best ones that will work for the future and will also take into account the broader reality of economy, which is that the economy is not separate and apart from nature. The economy and all of us are a part of nature. Now, how would I do that? That's your question. First of all, in terms of right representation, it would have to differ in every country, depending on where they start from, because most countries in the world are not even democracies at this point, and most that pretend to be democracies are only half democracies, and some that have been closer to being true democracies are, as we used to say in the Baptist church when I was growing up, backsliding. In that category, I put, unfortunately, my own country, the United States of America, moving away from democracy. Part of the reason for this is that we are not truly represented by those we choose to represent us. Why is this? Again, it varies, but it's a combination of money and manipulation in different ways, so that the true voice of the people is not heard, and we end up in different countries with people who pretend to represent us but truly do not. There's no way to get the best results there. And in the book, I propose a whole series of reforms that can change that. But I don't think having right representation is enough. I think we also need the collective wisdom that can come from going straight to the people themselves. This is not an original thought of mine. This is in Aristotle's Politics. And he may have gotten the idea, of course, from what happened in Athens in 508 BC when a renegade aristocrat named Cleisthenes came together with a lot of ordinary Athenians and created the first instance of what we can look back on and say is democracy. But it was a direct and participatory democracy, and it was fully participatory because the administration of the city-state was entrusted to citizens who were volunteers and chosen by random selection. They would serve for a year and then go back to their places in the city or in the countryside, and then maybe a second time in life they would serve another term of a year on some other administrative board or on a jury court. This was all done through sortition. There was a stone machine called a clarotarian that the Athenians employed in order to make certain that citizens were selected randomly. If you go to the museum at the Agora in Athens, you can see one. But we don't need to borrow that machine. Here today, we know about probability and we know about random scientific sampling, and that's what I propose we use to govern ourselves at every level of governance, including in international institutions. I would have double decision-making by both those who are representative rightly of their communities, their states, their countries, and by randomly selected circles of participation from volunteers. And at the global level, there would be from a volunteer sample ranging into the millions from people all over the planet. And I would do that in every institution, including the World Trade Organization.
Thank you. I think this proposal that you have of including sortition, so random selection of individuals in international organizations, is especially innovative. And I had a question on that proposal because sortition perfectly tackles the issue of inclusivity. However, the question of legitimacy, which is very timely for international organizations who are experiencing today, to some extent, a crisis of legitimacy, having randomly selected individuals instead of elected officials. How do you see this playing into international organizations who are struggling to some extent with their legitimacy?
I think this type of governance would provide to international institutions the democratic legitimacy they do not currently have. Many people have written long books explaining the existence of a democratic deficit in all international institutions. The best of these institutions do what they can to try to minimize this deficit. The WTO Public Forum is one example of how the WTO itself tries to reach out to people from around the world. We, the willing here, are among the people who would volunteer, perhaps, to be in a pool that might be chosen to engage in decision-making in this institution or in others. Now, some might say, well, if you have dual decision-making in which nothing happens until both the representatives of the nation-states and the participants in the circle of participation for that institution, which I would number at 151 people for reasons I explain in the book, wouldn't that slow things down? Well, my answer to that question is, how fast have we been proceeding the past 30 years in the WTO? We've accomplished some things. I am proud of the fisheries agreement, for example, but we all know that it's not nearly the agreement it ought to be and still can be. And what about all the other agreements we tried to conclude but have failed to do so? Why has that failed? One reason, I think, is institutional. We have mistakenly, here in the WTO, clung to the all-or-nothing approach of consensus negotiation when we should have aggressive plurilateralism, which is clearly permitted in the WTO treaty. But there's a broader issue. The other reason we haven't been able to conclude a lot of the trade agreements we want to conclude on digital trade, environmental goods and services, so much more, is because we don't have the political support to do so back in the capitals. Why don't we have that support? It's because the people in the capitals don't have the support of the people who choose them to do such things. Why don't they have that support? It's because of the pervasive distrust that people at the grassroots everywhere in the world have for institutions of all kinds. They don't trust experts, they don't trust elites, they don't trust institutions. Least of all, do they trust international institutions. So I think it's only when we begin to narrow that and eliminate that democracy deficit in international institutions through a means such as I have selected, through circles of participation, randomly selected from among volunteers globally, an ever-expanding list of millions of volunteers, that we will be able to get anything done that needs to be done. Furthermore, let me add, in terms of your question about structure, Lily, as you know from reading the book, I've also proposed that in addition to these randomly selected circles of participation in every institution in the world, starting with our local community and going all the way up to the United Nations and other international institutions such as this one, I would have two other kinds of randomly selected bodies. I would have circles for nature. The two would be selected randomly from among volunteers from around the world. And the purpose of the circles for nature would be to remind the decision makers of what I said earlier, which is that human economy, human civilization is nothing without the biosphere in which we live. When every decision we make, we must take into account the role of nature and the impact of nature. We're not doing that now. The WTO has been doing a much better job over the decades of making certain that trade doesn't trump environmental and ecological considerations. As some of you know, my colleagues and I in 1998 wrote something called the Shrimp Turtle Opinion, which proves that the WTO can put the environment before trade and often will. But that's not enough. We need to do a lot more institutionally, not only here, but in other international institutions. And lastly, I would have circles for the future. And these randomly selected circles would be comprised of volunteers from the ages of 12 to 21 from all over the world, who would also have an important advisory role. They too would make recommendations, along with the Circles for Nature, to the right representatives, and which here would be the General Counsel, and the circles of participation randomly selected that would be equal decision makers, along with the right representation bodies. If you don't believe that teenagers can make some good decisions about the future, then you haven't been paying attention lately. And most of the teenagers I know, even younger than my undergraduate students, have a much better idea of how the world is put together than we do. And furthermore, they're going to live in the future, so they need to have a say in it.
No, very interesting. And coming back to this idea of sortition, you take great inspiration from antique Greece and Athens, to the extent that I looked in your resume for a PhD in history somewhere, didn't find it, was surprised. And you take those lessons also from the drawbacks of democracy at the time, and you highlight how citizens unfortunately excluded women and slaves. And in today's democracy, what we see is that even though we don't have those formal legal barriers to participation, the underprivileged are the ones that still tend to participate less. And so if we are on a volunteering basis, the barriers to participation, which include information, which we discuss and we'll discuss later with communication, but also education, and simply the fact that the most underprivileged focus on survival and making ends meet. How do you see, what policies do you see for an enabling environment for this true effective participation where everybody is able to volunteer for sortition?
Well, as I explained in the book, I think we need to eliminate the very real obstacles that stand in the way of a lot of ordinary people around the world who would like to volunteer to help govern themselves. There's a long list of things in the book that I set out. I'll probably overlook a few in recounting them here, but first of all, significant compensation. The second, a guarantee that if you leave a job somewhere, this would be a 2-year period of both, and then decision-making for a year, and then an aftermath of accountability. Your job will be there when you get back. Child care, all kinds of physical and other forms of support that would make it possible not only for one of us here who might have the independent means to do so, but also for that villager in Malawi who wants to participate because she's concerned about why they don't have any drinking water. And so she wants to participate in, for example, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization or the United Nations Environment Program, and wants to volunteer for sortition. Obviously, not everyone in the world is going to be able to do this. There are more than 8 billion people in the world, and not everyone in ancient Athens did it. It must be said, and I emphasize this in the book, there were many shortcomings in the ancient Athenian democracy. First of all, women could not become citizens. They had very few rights. Second, immigrants, although they were essential to the workings of the Athenian economy, could not become citizens. And lastly, there were tens and tens of thousands of enslaved people who could not become citizens. Aristotle himself was not born in Athens, so he was not a citizen. When he opened the Lycia, the Lyceum, as we say in the West, at school, he had to rent the land because since he wasn't a citizen, he couldn't own property. So there were many shortcomings in this democracy, but for those who were citizens, they had the opportunity for more self-rule than anyone else has ever had. Classicists tell us that more than a third of the citizens of Athens at some time in their lives, at least once, participated in actually governing the city in some executive fashion on one of their 10-member magistrate boards for weights and measures or transportation or food inspection or water inspection or public safety, whatever it may be. The analogy to today is obvious in that what we want to create is the universal opportunity to participate. I would have, and we can debate this, but I would have sample pools that included only volunteers. But they would, over time, number in the millions, because we would aggressively seek out to include them. And some efforts are already beginning to do this, such as the Global Citizens Assembly that we had in Glasgow 4 years ago and will be in Brazil in COP30 in November. And I have to say, Vera, the Brazilian government has been very positive in supporting that effort. I don't think every government would be. And the challenge is to make certain that people know about this and have the opportunity to do this. if you know you had an opportunity to participate and did not participate, nevertheless, you know you had the opportunity. If you do get in the random pool and are not selected, nevertheless, you know you had the opportunity. And if you're selected, or if you are not, you know that there's someone there in the pool that's randomly selected who's going to reflect you. Now, you're not going to be able to say that, okay, I'm a left-handed female carpenter from the North Island of New Zealand who likes football. So in order for me to be represented, there has to be another left-handed female carpenter from the North Island of New Zealand who likes football. That may not happen. There may be one from the South Island of New Zealand. But in terms of the broader diversity of our society, women, minority groups of all kinds, the disabled, there are 650 million differently abled people in the world. That's a good number to know. And all other diverse minority groups, if you have a random selection from a sample pool, then you're going to be able to make it representative of the population as a whole. Scientifically, what matters is not the size of the population. What matters is the size and randomness of the sample.
No, and what you mentioned, this idea of knowing that it could have been you that would have been selected, I think plays a huge part in the legitimacy we discussed earlier. And thinking about this openness to diversity and leaving access for more people who are currently not included in leadership spheres. To this idea of communication that we discussed earlier, as well as a barrier to participation, one expression that caught my attention in your book and that I found very amusing is that you qualified social media as an incessant human hum. And I found it very interesting because at first glance, what could think that social media giving access to everyone, leaving everyone to participate is very close to what you describe as deliberation, which is people coming together and talking things through on fair and equal terms. And so can you talk more about the difference in what we see today of indifferent participation through social media and the model you propose of deliberation with high inclusion?
Yeah. I believe that the internet can be used as part of this process to provide and circulate information that is requested by those who are randomly selected. As I stress in the book, I believe that all of these endeavors should be fully transparent. Meetings of these circles should be live streamed throughout the world. Nothing should be behind closed doors. As some of you know, the first thing that I did after leaving the WTO 20 years ago was an op-ed in the Washington Post in which I urged that the WTO open the doors to all its proceedings. And I feel that way about all international institutions. I'm from Florida, where up until lately we believed in government in the sunshine, as we call it. But in terms of decision making, I'm very much of the view that when these circles of participation come together to deliberate on decisions, it must be face to face. It should not be by a Zoom call. I've done both. There's a real human difference in being in the same room with someone else and being able to see their body language, hear their expressions, hear their emphasis, engage in a real exchange of views, a real conversation, rather than being in different boxes on a Zoom call. This is not an original thought. This is John Dewey, the great American pragmatist philosopher who believes that democracy must be face-to-face. He said that in the days before the internet, but I don't believe, based on what we've seen from social media, that old John would change his mind. So I want all of these circles of participation, these circles of nature, these circles for the future, to be deliberative and face-to-face. Participation is not enough. There must be real deliberation. Some of you know from reading John Dryzek from Australia and others who are experts in the process, the deliberation. There's a science to how you go about it. Everyone must be truly heard, and everyone must have an equal opportunity truly to speak and be heard. And if that happens, even if some of the people participating don't agree with the final decision, nevertheless, they have a certain amount of buy-in into the process, because they know that next time they will be heard and there will be an opportunity for them to get the majority. And none of this can happen online. So I disagree with a lot of democracy advocates who say we need to have global plebiscites online. I think that would be madness.
Very interesting. And before we move on to Q&A, thinking about this idea of everyone having to feel like they're heard, you mentioned in the book that leaders have to be close to the people. Yet you also, and you include, as you mentioned, the practical step of financial contributions. Yeah, you also mentioned that they have to be competent enough and to have enough authority to be able to tell the majority when the majority is not right. And I would think that this includes some kind of expertise or experience, and B, some kind of authority. And I was wondering how you would articulate this authority and maybe even some superiority with this imperative of having leaders close to the people.
Well, let me draw, as I rarely do, on my own experience. I'm a former member of the Congress of the United States. I was elected twice, retired undefeated, chose not to seek a third term. Instead, I ended up here, which I had not foreseen, and I'm glad of it. I am a Democrat, and I was elected and reelected as a Democrat in one of the most Republican districts in the country. And I did not vote as a Republican. I was a Clinton-Gore Democrat, if you can remember such a thing, from the 1990s. And I was the first Democrat in the history of the South elected in a majority Republican district. I did not do that by pandering. I did not do that simply by telling people what they wanted to hear. I told people what I thought they needed to hear, whether they wanted to hear it or not. And enough people saw that as refreshing that I won majorities each time I ran. So I'm confident that if you give the people a real opportunity to let you lead, they're willing to do it. They're yearning for leadership. In my country, people are yearning for real leadership. They're yearning for people who will actually tell the truth, but very few will in either party. And part of our problem in the United States. And the worst thing that was going to happen to me was that I was going to lose an election and be condemned to quadrupling my income in the practice of law. So I was willing to risk losing an election in order to be able to serve in the right way. And that's essentially a point of view that I think we need. It's not one that I invented. I learned that from my mentor, a man named Reuben Askew, the greatest governor of Florida ever had. And he and I both learned it from reading Edmund Burke and his letter to the electors of Bristol. Ron's nodding read it too. A leader owes his constituents not just his vote, but his judgment. Otherwise, you should simply have a plebiscite.
Thank you so much, James, for answering all my questions. You write so much in your book about the advantages of deliberation, participation, the wiseness of the crowd, that it would be very selfish and absurd of me to not open the floor for Q&As, to give the opportunity to the audience to also ask you a question about the book. If you have questions, please raise your hand. My colleagues will circulate mics. Thank you.
And if you would just tell me who you are and where you're from. Some of you I know, but not all, and I'd like to know all of you.
Thank you very much. I'm Jana Dreyer, the founder of Borderlegs, this website on international trade policy. Thank you very much for going on this work on something so fundamental, although it's not directly trade policy. But I think it's really thank you, because we are
Believe me, if how is what I recommended, trade policy will change.
I have a question as someone who works out in international relations. I mean, what you're doing, what you're proposing, is very revolutionary in many ways. It would probably, it does undermine the system of national sovereign states on which our system is based.
That's part of the idea.
I have my personal gripes with it, but it's going to be very hard to do. But as someone who's a lawyer, where does that leave the system, or where, as we know it, as it's enshrined in the UN Charter, basically?
Again, yeah. Let me speak in terms of international law for a moment. I apologize for that. I usually try to avoid citing footnotes from my opinions. You're quite right. The basis of international law since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 has been sovereign nation states. I am not among those who is in favor of abolishing or neutering nation states. I should believe they should keep their sovereignty and use it wisely by having participatory democracy. But in what I'm proposing with sortition, with these circles of participation in international institutions all over the world, I'm proposing that we not go through nation states, but we go entirely around them. I believe the participants in these circles of participation, circles for the future, circles for nature, should participate as members of humanity and not as people from one country as another. I believe that when they pass the threshold of the circle and enter the circle and begin to govern, they need to govern as if they are one of humanity. I think it is long past time when we started to think of our species as one and act as one. More than 30 years ago, when I helped pass the bill in the Congress of the United States that put the space station in orbit, my district in Florida included the Kennedy Space Center. I'm the one, along with a couple of my colleagues, who made it an international space station. I believe then, I still believe, that humanity should go into space as one. I'll be writing about that in a chapter in my next book, which I'm researching now. I also believe that there are many problems we face as humanity that can be resolved only if we act as humanity, only if we cooperate. Climate change is one, biodiversity loss is another, nuclear proliferation is a third, and on and on and on. As I've said many times in China and the United States, I don't think most of the problems in the world can be solved unless China and the United States are working alongside each other to solve them. That doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. But we certainly need to agree that we need to save our planet because it's the only one we have. And we shouldn't just the two of us decide for the rest of the world. It should be a common effort of everyone in the world.
Thank you so much for your remarks. My name is Pachea Numalo. I'm a research associate at Chatham House's Environment and Society Center. My question actually is around...
I'll be at Chatham House next Monday in London. Hope to see you there. Yes.
Perfect. Then we'll see you. Thank you. My question is actually around governance. Issues of things like corruption and elite capture have plagued governments in the past. So how do you propose insulating this new approach to democracy from these kinds of threats?
I've got a great deal about that in the book, if you have a chance to read it, but that's a very important question. Because, of course, currently our systems of representation are corrupted, largely by money, but also by other kinds of influence, peddling what the economists call rent-seeking, but it's just corruption. Protectionism is one of those things. I'm opposed to protectionism, as you might surmise, since I have WTO tattooed on my forehead. With respect to these circles of participation, first of all, I think that all lobbying should be barred. And if that rule is broken, I don't think that the penalty fines alone. It should be lengthy imprisonment. Now, when big corporations, in my country, for example, break the law, they pay $100 million fine for the privilege of, through their law-breaking, making $10 billion. No, put them in jail. I think there should be a code of ethics for everyone who participates. And I think there should be, which will be strict, full financial disclosure of all assets, full financial disclosure of anything that happens while you're a member of the body. As I mentioned briefly earlier, I think there should be a 9-month training period, 12 months of actual service and decision-making, and then 3 months of accountability afterwards, in which each participant is examined and has to be accountable for what they did. Not in terms of the substance of what they supported, but in terms of whether they complied with the ethical rules. And if they did not, there should be penalties for that, including imprisonment, depending on the nature of the penalty. I believe in having expert bodies to advise these groups, similar to how, I explain all this in the book in detail, a process of selection similar to how we select the IPCC for the climate COP. But they should be purely advisory bodies. The experts should be there to provide information, introduce options upon request, not to make the decisions. Is that helpful to you?
Oh, yes, very much.
And as I already explained, financially, I think we need to do everything possible to pay these people very well, pay for all their expenses in being in Geneva or New York or wherever they need to be to do this, and provide them with child care and job security and the like, so that there will be no deterrent to volunteering. There may be incentives to doing so. Who next?
Very interesting discussion. Maybe in the interest of time, we can start grouping questions. Yes.
You try to remember them all, because I usually, if you get 3, I usually forget the last 2.
I'm Dr. Navneet from India. I represent All India Sustainable Development Council. For you, I have a question here. As sustainability is a global challenge, but democracy is often strongest at the local levels, how can we best balance grassroots democratic action with the need of coordinated international agreements and policies? So that's my, thank you.
I have, before I forget it, I have a couple of, I'll speak shortly. I have a couple of chapters in the book where I talk about what's happening now. There are literally hundreds of thousands of local and regional sustainable development networks throughout the world. 50,000 have been noticed to the United Nations, but there are many, many more. Many of them don't even realize they're working for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but they are trying to end poverty, end discrimination, promote health, promote education, help the climate, and more. These are all experiments in democratic participation, and they often govern themselves in precisely the way I proposed. And I believe we can scale up and link up all of these networks as a beginning to what I'm proposing, even as we try at the global level, such as we're trying at the COP in Brazil, to begin having some global citizens' assemblies. I'll try to keep my answers shorter, Lily.
So my name is Carmine Soprano. I'm a development economist at the World Bank, where I work on trade, among other issues, but I'm also an advisor to various UN agencies and a lecturer at university. Professor, your presentation is so insightful, and so is your bio, that while you said you don't like to draw on it, hopefully I'm allowed to ask a two-part question about your own personal experiences, because part one is about your experience at the WTO. When you landed here as a founding member of the appellate body, the atmosphere was very, very different about the institution and the energy, etc. So what do you think went really wrong with about 30 years? What did we do wrong as practitioners in this space? What would you have done differently so that the WTO would not be in the conditions?
I'm going to give you a second question, but let me answer that one. Well, I've already said what I think went wrong in the system itself, which is we chose the wrong negotiating approach to try to make new deals, and also we lost the support of capitals back home for trade liberalization because they got cold feet. What went wrong with the appellate body itself is nothing. What went wrong with the appellate body is that my country betrayed the system. My own country got cold feet. The United States of America would like to be the judge and jury in its own cases in the WTO, and the system does not allow that. Every member of the WTO must be equal for the bar of justice, and the United States of America must be treated just like everyone else. They don't like that. And this is not just the current administration. It was the Biden administration as well. It was a view in the Obama administration. So they have all combined on a bipartisan basis to betray the interests of the United States of America in the world, as well as the rest of the world, which are in having the international rule of law and trade. And I have been and will continue to be relentless in my criticism of this U.S. policy.
Thank you for that. And speaking of your own experience as a representative of your country, if you were running now in your district in Florida, maybe next year for midterm elections, what do you think are the 2, 3, 4 things that your constituents would need to hear against what some consider an ongoing democratic backsliding?
At this point, if I were running for office in the United States, I would propose for the United States exactly what I'm proposing for the United States and the world in this book. This book is largely about how we put in place structures democratically to be able to achieve sustainable development. I'm working now on a next book in which I lay out what substantively I would propose is the way to be able to sustain and enhance human prosperity for everyone while also protecting and preserving the planet.
Thank you so much. We have time for one last question.
Thank you very much. And my name is Coşkun, and I'm from Izmir University of Economics, Turkey. And I had a very quick look at the...
Your country a number of times. I love Turkey.
Oh, that's great.
I was just in Ephesus a few months ago.
Wow, wow. So it's directly coincides with what happened in ancient Greek, the Ephesus. So your book is wonderful. And I just want to tell you one thing. I'm planning to use your book in my syllabus for the students and to construct a syllabus. And I asked ChatGPT to prepare a syllabus for me, and perfectly, it has been extracted many issues regarding the current situation in my country. Just I want to thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me, since you all were so good as to sit here, if you're interested in reading my book, and there are not enough here for you to purchase, please go online to Cambridge University Press. Buy the paperback, not the hardback. And then when you check out, put in the following code, BACCHUS25, B-A-C-C-H-U-S 25, and that'll get you a 20% discount. I'm interested in people reading the book. I'm not depending entirely for my livelihood on the royalties. Thank you also very much, and thank you, Lily.
Thank you. Join me in thanking James Pnyx for his time and sharing his insights with us today.